Hello, everyone. It's Laurie and Jennie again with another episode of MoonLore. Today, we're talking about the Aquarius new moon, which happens on February 1st, 2022, shortly after midnight. It actually happens in Eastern time at 12:46 a.m., which means if you're on the other side of the country, if you're in Pacific time, this is happening the day before on the last day of January. So depending on where you live, it's happening either on the 31st or February 1st. So before we get into talking about the new moon itself, we're going to just real quickly again touch on helping people to really understand how the cycle works. And I'm going to use a little visual today and just open up a chart here. And there's no planets in this chart except the sun and the moon. So you can see at a new moon, this is when the moon is between Earth and the sun. Therefore, when we look, we don't see it at all. The nights are very dark at the new moon. So that's when they are in the same position. Now, a week after that, we come to the first quarter phase. Now, you can see that what has happened in that first quarter happens on February 8th, and you can see it is 90 degrees between the two. The sun has moved away from, the moon has moved away from the sun and is now 90 degrees apart at that first quarter moon. Now, a week after that, we're going to come to the full moon. The full moon this month is going to be on February 16th. And that's, you can see very clearly, here we are right in the center on the earth. And on one side of us will be the sun, on the other side will be the moon. So that's the full moon. And then a week following that, whoops, I went to the wrong place there. A week following that, on February 23rd, we come to the last quarter phase. And you see now that the moon is in its approach for the next new moon, 90 degrees apart. You know, these quarter phases, the sun and the moon are in a square aspect, which creates some tension. You know, one way that we often think about this is, equating it to the plant cycle, where at the new moon, you plant a seed. At that first quarter phase, again on February 8th, that would be, the idea would be that you're taking some action on that seed that you've planted, or that plant growth is really, it's really in an activated state at that point. And then at the opposition, we kind of see what has happened with the cycle. We see the full bloom of the plant, or we just see the full illumination of what began at the new moon. And then again, at that third quarter phase, the 23rd, the process is breaking down to prepare for the next full cycle, which will happen at the new moon on March 2nd. So that kind of just covers the whole cycle right there. Did I clarify that all right, Jennie, or is there something you need to say to set that up a little better?
I think it's great. I think it's great for people to see how it works, like just in a round circle like that, because it really lays it out. No, I think what it did for me was it made me realize how much I want people listening to this and watching this just to get that when those different 4 phases that Laurie just outlined hits a sensitive point in your chart, you're more likely to experience something profound and obvious. So some cycles are going to be more profound for you than others. And that's why you really do need to contact an astrologer to a certain point, because you want to know where those sensitive points are. And then you can look at your year and decide, what new moons and what even quarter moons might be impacting you. And that's going to really help personalize this and help you understand how to use these. So that's just what it made me think of. So I thought it was great. So thank you.
Yeah. So with this, this particular new moon is happening at 12 degrees Aquarius. So, along those lines of what you're saying, if you've got, a personal planet or your ascendant or midheaven right near that 12 degrees of a fixed sign, a fixed sign, then you're going to feel this more strongly than if you don't. So the fixed signs are going to be Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius.
Yeah.
So look at your chart if you've got it. If you've got something right near there, near that 12 degrees, then this will be more personal to you.
Yeah, and these fixed signs really are dealing in a lot of ways, I think, different ways to think about it, but with resources, and what personal resources you have, what ability do you have to stay with processes. And that's what's being shaken up on the big scale with the Saturn and Uranus, both in these fixed signs. So those are really being shaken up right now. And we're used to those things being really steadfast and constant. And the things that we're facing right now is our constants being kind of turned on their heads. So those themes, probably everybody's feeling those, both in the global level, but also personally, one degree or another. So.
Right. Yeah. And this new moon, when we open up the chart for this new moon, you'll see how directly this particular new moon is tied into this bigger cycle that has been so powerful in the last couple of years here. So before we get into that, let's talk about Aquarius a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
What do we know about Aquarius?
Well, Aquarius is the fixed air sign. So whenever you hear air, we're thinking thought processes and thinking and cerebral, like this ability to look at things before they've been created in the tangible world. So they're things that you're imagining and picturing and plotting and planning. And then you're networking and communicating, so those are all air things. Aquarius really is in its highest manifestation. I just think it's a genius. I mean, it really has this brilliance of an inventor, and it can innovate. Like it responds to an issue and it innovates, and it uses the available resources to shift into something totally you never thought about before. So that's kind of what I think about, just to start with.
Yeah, it's great that you bring up the genius quality of Aquarius, because I love that. And I think of it as, it's genius, but not in the manner of the highest IQ in the room. It is the ability on an intellectual level to bring thought processes beyond where they have gone in the past. The ability to, take exactly what you're saying, taking resources and imagining them beyond what the current ideas and expectations are. And that's the true meaning of genius to me. Doesn't have anything to do with IQ. People with low or high IQs can be very able to innovate or not. It's not about the level in that way.
Yeah, and especially when you think about those levels are often set up by a culture rather than being some sort of absolute equal kind of yardstick. It's really not. So I love that you're saying that, because you're right. It's this ability to think out of the box, think beyond the wall, think into a new place. The other higher manifestation I think of with Aquarius is that humanitarian piece. Now, when I think that, I mean, some of that to me is social justice and looking at everybody and trying to bring some sort of equal, like some equanimity to it. But to me, it's also including beyond human. What about animals, and also just to our environment. So I really think about the idealism, the visionary ability of Aquarius can take us to those levels. And that's what we're seeing, like, in our world right now, is we're being challenged to think about those things that can move us beyond what we've existed with so far. So that's the beauty of Aquarius. Though there is a dark side, right, Laurie?
Well, the like with all the signs, there are different sides to it. And Aquarius it's very interesting because it has the ability to detach from emotion which is required in order to go outside that box, to think outside the box. There's a requirement to not let emotion tie you up. So Aquarius does have that kind of detachment, that subjective ability. Yeah.
Yeah.
How else would you say that?
Well, I would say that it's great because in the air realm, it can dream up these ideas, it can imagine these things, and make a picture of them. But then you have to take that idea and drop it in the real world, where you have to plug in the emotion, you have to plug in the structure, you have to plug in what I would say be the fire element, bring it to life. So it's wonderful in and of itself, but it also must consider it at some point, it needs to plug into this bigger picture and include these other things, because otherwise it's just isolated and by itself and alienated, which is ultimately the
Right.
darker side of Aquarius, is when it's totally alienated and devoid of feeling, and then it's unable to have compassion, and it can't be that humanitarian viewpoint. So that's kind of, I think that gives a pretty good spectrum, like
Yeah, I
said,
think
of
so too.
Aquarius.
I think
Yeah.
so too. Aquarius is, I love Aquarius. Without Aquarius, we would be in the dark ages. Let's just
Yeah.
leave it at that.
Yeah.
We really
Um,
need that ability to move the intellect, the ideas forward.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to mention one other thing, which I hope isn't, you can correct me if it's going too far off. But one thing that's really interesting is Laurie and I both have been working with some of the ancient systems of astrology, just a little bit here and there, and learning more about it. And this is a Saturn ruled sign. And that might come as like a, wait, what? Like Saturn, but that's restriction and accountability and all these difficult things. And yet Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius as well. And it's an interesting thing to think about it, because Saturn definitely deals with structure. And I think one of the things we've talked about is how Saturn with Capricorn is serious and within the structure, and it's contained by the wall, and it's culturally acceptable and all that. And Aquarius is like, oh, I'm just going to jump over. I need to go to the other side of that wall and go and investigate these other things. And eventually it breaks, that wall, and opens up to a new paradigm. And that's kind of what Aquarius is doing, but it's still to do with those Saturn topics.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's really been interesting thinking of Saturn as the ruler of Aquarius, given, I've studied astrology for 100 years with thinking of it as just having Uranus the ruler, and bringing Saturn in has really enriched my understanding of Aquarius in a really interesting way. And if Aquarius can be as stubborn as hell. These wild ideas, this ability to move into these wild ideas can be very yeah, they can hold a person in that steadfast, stable
fixed.
place
Yeah.
as well. It's interesting. I really have enjoyed grappling in my own mind with this kind of what seemed like a conundrum at first, but now it makes sense. It just really makes sense. I'm not sure if I can articulate it as well as I can understand it at this point, but it's coming.
Yeah, I feel the same way. But it's definitely something to think about. Yeah, do you want to look at the chart?
Yeah, let's take a look at the chart.
So if you have any comments about that, we would love to hear it. So do tell.
Oh, you know what? We didn't say that at all. And I'm going to just interrupt us before we say another thing.
Okay.
To say, hey, all of you who are watching, please like this video. Please make a comment. Please share it with your friends. It would help us immensely. So with that being said, let's look at this chart. Wow.
Well, so right off the bat, you see sun and moon together in Aquarius at 12 degrees, and you can't help but immediately see that exactly what we're talking about, Saturn, the ruler of Aquarius, in the mix. So we are dealing with some very Saturnian issues with this Aquarius, no matter what we say.
Yes. So yeah, you can't help but understand, if you've been listening to us or watching other astrology stuff, Uranus and Saturn have been in this square pattern all the way through 2021. And later this year, they're getting so close again. So this is, and that square between Uranus and Saturn is very much what we see reflected in the culture with all the battles going on, name them, all the battles going on culturally. So this is a very cultural statement, that Saturn and Uranus square, and this new moon coming right in there and activating that whole piece again. So this is a very culturally potent moment as well.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of those charts that, just like you're saying, there's this massive cultural shift going on. And then this is what brings it right on down home into our personal lives, into our own spheres of my job, my family, whatever, my friendships, all the things. So this really connects the two and helps you see that we really are part of all this cultural shift, and all the things that we're doing on a personal level play into this bigger story. And this chart really just kind of screams that. Because wherever you have an Aquarius in your chart, it's had Saturn there for a while, which brings in this really the taskmaster, like the lessons you must learn in order to appropriately mature, in order to appropriately take your inner authority, all those kinds of questions. So it's
yeah.
So serious new moon.
This area where you have had that, the authoritative teacher of Saturn has been really working on you, and culturally there's been your own understanding of the culture and how that impacts you. Okay, so we were talking about the square aspect between Saturn and Uranus and how this new moon plays into that. But there was one other piece, and that you started talking about, Jennie.
Yeah.
Which is this sextile to Chiron. How do you think that plays in? That's lovely.
I just, right away, we think opportunity, right? We see sextile opportunity, and opportunity means that you're going to have to, first of all, recognize it, and second of all, take action on it. So you might just miss it, and hopefully you don't. But with a sextile to Chiron, there's just a really big suggestion around all of these struggles that we're having right now, bringing about healing on a massive scale. I mean, on an individual scale and on a cultural scale. And that, so it's like, take these Aquarian activities and think about that as a healing process.
Yeah, in the process of, if you're thinking about this new moon as a time to plant a seed, to kind of work with this issue in this area of your life, really understanding that at that same time there is this opportunity to really bring a healing element into your own personal life, and expand it into the cultural issues that are involved here.
Yeah, and I feel a little bit like, healing is this sort of word that we throw around, and we're like, yeah, we know what that means, but just, I mean, I do want to articulate that a little bit, where healing means, first of all, accepting wherever you are, what's happening, just stopping and accepting. And then the other piece is that it really is a movement towards wholeness. It doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean everything's fixed and you feel great. It means that you are moving towards wholeness, and you recognize the things that are difficult, and you're still moving and growing throughout your life. I mean, do you have anything you want to add to that? Because then
no, I think that's pretty clear. We all have constant, healing is not something that you do and then it's done. Oh, I did that. It is that ongoing process of developing wholeness, exactly as you said. I think that's perfect. So are we ready at this point? Is there anything else we want to talk about? I guess one thing is this seed that we're planting. In 2 weeks we come to the full moon. When is that happening?
Oh, the full moon is on February 16th, and it's at 28 Leo will be that full moon. So that's coming up. We'll see that.
Okay, and then with the bigger cycle, the Aquarius full moon is going to be landing on August 11th, 2022.
Yeah.
So think about that also. With the seed that you're planting right now, you're going to really see a big statement of illumination on that in
Yeah.
early August, August 11th.
Yeah. The only other things to note are simply that Venus, very recently from this chart, stationed direct. Venus has been retrograde for a while. It's stationed direct on the 28th of January, 29th, depending where you live. And you'll note that Mercury is still retrograde in this chart, though it's going to be coming out of it. So this new moon kind of marks that we are coming out of that intense retrograde season. I mean, you can sigh a breath of relief or whatever, or it depends on your personality. But anyway, so that's good. Something to realize about this new moon, that is starting to move us forwards out of this really deeply introspective, challenging inner time.
Yeah, this having both Venus and Mercury retrograde at the same time, it's been challenging. It's been very challenging for people, myself included. I have to say, I usually feel like I manage these retrogrades very well, but this has been challenging. And it's been interesting also in the course of going through this, just looking at the charts of people who have both of these planets retrograde.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah.
That's a whole nother conversation for another day.
Right. And what of what Laurie and I have offered to you in the last few weeks, I feel like it's Capricorn. And where's Capricorn in your chart? Rah, 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 because it's being Capricorn new moon and Venus retrograde in Capricorn and Mercury retrograde in Capricorn. And, so thank goodness today we're going to talk about Aquarius, where Aquarius is in your chart, though with Saturn.
Okay. So now let's stop sharing that and talk about, the individual impact.
Okay.
Okay. So if you have Aries rising, this is going to be landing in your 11th house. Now, the first question to ask yourself is, well, first of all, what's the 11th house? The 11th house is about community. It's the like-minded groups of people that support you to your hopes and dreams for the future. So that's kind of what the way I think of the 11th house. So Saturn has been going through this area since December of 2020. What have you been working on around developing, understanding, deepening your connection to community? And what does this new moon offer you to plant a seed, renew some growth in that area?
Yeah, that sounds good. And we were just talking about how wherever you have this Aquarius, it's sort of saying, hey, what innovative gifts do you have here around your thinking, and what kinds of things are you good at creating with your mind? But with Saturn there, it sort of begs this other question of like, what is the balance between freedom and restriction in this area of your life? Like, what do you need to be accountable to? Some of those types of questions. And so with that Aries, you're looking at your community and your accountability to your community, your participation, your accountability. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So then if you have Taurus rising, this is in your 10th house. What's happening with your career or your reputation? The 10th house is basically about how we are seen or how we function out in the most public area of our lives. Generally, we tend to think of it as career. If you don't have a career, it's your reputation. So thinking about that, what has the effort been since December of 2020? What have you been learning? Where have you been really focused on growth and development in your career? And what is this new moon offering to, what is the seed that you're planting to develop further on that level?
Yeah, that's great. I was thinking about the fact that Saturn's been going through that house. How can you use discipline to bring about these ideas of innovation that you have in your life? And this is a longer process. And then the short term with this new moon, it's like, what are envisioning new possibilities over the next couple of weeks or possibly months? So, yeah.
I really like what you just said about discipline. How did you say it? I wanted to remember exactly how you said it, but finding the discipline to create the innovation.
Mhm.
You know, that's really very much what this new moon is the discipline and innovation. They have to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
You cannot, and that's why Saturn's rulership of Aquarius makes sense.
Nice.
You cannot innovate wild, new, unusual things without some discipline. So
Yeah.
yeah. So then we move on to if you have Gemini rising, it's falling in your ninth house. So ninth house, you're thinking about your worldview,
Mhm.
your understanding of the bigger structures of education, travel, culture. What's your view on these things? And what's been the discipline, the responsibility, all those serious Saturn things? What's been happening there, and what's the seed you're planting?
Nice. I love that. Yeah, I feel like this, I always like the inventor archetype with Aquarius. It's like, how can you reinvent your worldview? How
Ooh,
can you
I
tweak
like
it? You know, what can you take in that will expand your thinking to a whole new humanitarian level? So,
yeah.
yeah.
Huh. That's really, I like thinking about that. The planting the seed of a new, innovative, responsible worldview.
Hmm.
That's beautiful. Okay, so now we're going on to Cancer. If you have Cancer rising, this is happening in your eighth house.
Mhm.
The eighth house is kind of deep waters. The eighth house really is about how you navigate other people's stuff, other people's baggage, other people's issues, other people's money, resources, how you navigate people who have values very different than your own.
Yeah.
So, where's your struggle been in the past year plus?
Mhm.
Um, where's the
Yeah.
struggle been, and what's the innovative seed you can plant
Mhm.
to develop more responsibility in how you navigate that?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is when you have Cancer rising and you have Aquarius in this eighth house, it usually means you have, because you have Aquarius in the eighth house, you usually have like an objective view of other people's stuff. But the tricky part becomes, but it's a watery house. So you have to navigate other people's emotions, even though you have this great view. And so you having to kind of get into the thick of it. So I think about just, you've got to have an innovative ritual around how do you do that, whether that's something you do on a daily basis, but something that you can connect with to keep you reminded of that just because you can see the view doesn't mean you know how to engage very easily with the difficulties you're facing. And Saturn is certainly here to teach you about boundaries, like
Right.
100%. So,
Absolutely. So make sure if you've got Cancer rising, you are really taking a ritual very seriously in, yeah, planting that
yeah,
seed to learn more about how to navigate others.
yeah, not it.
Right. Right. Not you. Not you. Okay. So the next one we come to is Leo rising. If you have Leo rising, this is going to be falling in your seventh house. And your seventh house is about personal, intimate relationships. People tend to think of it as, you know, your spouse or your romantic partner, but it's also, it's also going to encompass your people you work with on a regular basis, people, yeah, not just your spouse, but also your work people and your your doctor, your lawyer,
Yeah.
your astrologer, your therapist.
Mhm.
Important one-on-one interactions. So you've been learning over the last year plus, you've been learning a lot about how to navigate those relationships and how to develop, yeah, developing a more innovative way of interacting with others. So this seed you're planting is to find more responsible innovation in personal relationships.
Nice. Yeah, nicely put. I think the dance that Saturn's asking you to do right now is this dance between cooperation and freedom. like making sure that you have the freedom you want in your relationship, which you're going to need a lot if you have Leo rising, but you're also cooperating. So you're also tapping into that end of the air sign, that you're cooperating in order to create more equanimity in your relationships. So
yeah, with Aquarius in that area, yeah, relationships really do require a lot of freedom. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so if you've got Virgo rising, okay, if you have Virgo rising. If you have Virgo rising, this new moon is falling in your 6th house. So just, to think about the 6th house is really our day-to-day routines that support our health. It's self-care, it's your dietary issues, your health issues of all sorts. So since this approximately December of 2020, you've probably been really working in some way to take responsibility, to build your accountability around how you take care of yourself. So this kind of puts a stamp on that, like, okay, what are you going to do now to start a new, innovative self-care practice, perhaps?
Yeah. And I was thinking about the fact that when you have Virgo rising, you always have Aquarius in your 6th house, right? So it's, it is, you have to get into your mind space, your mindset, and kind of, I feel like you have to be a little creative and inventive, because Aquarius likes that. So if you can just tweak your routines just a little bit, bring in something new and that excites you, whatever that is, that's going to help you stick to those things, rather than it being like, oh, it's a routine, because Aquarius doesn't really want to do lots of routines. It wants to be wild and crazy. So bringing in a little bit of like an inventive thing to keep yourself interested and curious about what you're doing. So
yeah, anyone with Virgo rising has a somewhat eclectic approach to their healthcare anyway.
Yeah,
with Aquarius. Okay, so now if you have Libra rising, this is going to be falling in your 5th house. The 5th house is the area of your life that's really about how you, about your creativity, or about how you give love. They used to talk about the 5th house as the house of children, love affairs, and creativity. It's where we give of ourselves freely.
Nice. I like that.
Oh yeah, Saturn's been in there since December of 2020. You've been developing, it's kind of, I always think it's a interesting place to have Saturn moving through the 5th house, because the 5th house is also about play and fun and, all those things. And it's kind of a little tricky. You're working hard at your creativity with Saturn moving through that area. So with this new moon there, it's planting a seed to encourage more of that growth of creativity.
Yeah. Just I was thinking, just breathing fresh air into your new projects, the things that and those are those projects that really are you pouring your love into. Like, these aren't just like the stuff you have to do. These are the things that bring you joy. And you're right. It is ironic to have Saturn. It's like, get serious about having fun.
Right.
So just,
get serious about fun. Plant a seed for serious, innovative fun. Okay. So then if you have Scorpio rising, this is falling in your 4th house, the 4th house being the area of family, home, your ancestral line. So, since December of 2020, Saturn's been going through that area, really deepening your creative, innovative understanding of your family, perhaps. Maybe this is a time to ask some questions of family members, to get clear about some of your more unusual relatives.
Yeah, I think with that Scorpio rising, and then so ending up with Aquarius in the 4th house, I mean, this is like airing out old habits from your family life. I think it's kind of interesting, because our family life is the place where we have the most subconscious habits that we're not really aware of, that we just got when we were growing up in our childhood. And with Aquarius here, you have a little bit extra I don't know, clarity to kind of see beyond that. And so now is the time with Saturn there to really just take accountability, like be accountable to yourself and cast off some of those habits and use the power of your mind to do that. It's like taking responsibility for it and bleh, getting rid of it.
Yeah, getting really clear, getting that kind of detached from emotion clarity on your relationships with your family members, possibly. There's something in there to plant a seed around. So
For sure. Yeah.
if you've got Sagittarius rising, this is happening in your third house. The third house is the day-to-day workings of the mind. It's communication. It can relate also to your siblings, since those are the relationships that you really began to develop communication skills with. So, what is it in that area of communication, of how you think, that you've kind of been working on for the last year plus? What's been the effort? Possibly issues around really, the importance of your voice,
Mhm.
the importance of take you with Saturn, the responsibility of your voice, the responsibility of that innovative understanding that you have, and bringing that into your voice, using your voice for that. So that's the
Yeah.
seed that you're planting.
Yeah. It seems like with Saturn there, it really is this challenge around how do you develop truly skillful dialogue? So this is both how you are articulating your voice, incorporating all the things you've learned and how you speak, but this is also how you change, how you take in other people's what they're saying, like really listening and tuning in. And kind of I was just thinking about like bringing in radical new communication, which in this day and age, I think really does mean listening. It's hard to do. We're all so distracted, and and really, truly, mindfully listening is one hell of a skill.
Yeah.
So, if you have Sagittarius rising, I hope you're working on that because we need more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I sort of keep a list in my mind of different books that people should be reading depending on what sign Saturn is moving through in their chart. And it's kind of funny. I just have to, because it's right here. This We Need to Talk by Celeste Headley is a fascinating book that one of my clients who has a Sagittarius rising was telling me how helpful this book has been while Saturn's been moving through their third house, and really developing. And it's a lot. It's not just communicating, it's listening. In order to understand how to communicate, you have to listen.
Oh, I
So
love that.
that's the seed you're planting if you have Sagittarius rising. Now, if you've got Capricorn rising, this is falling in your second house. Second house is going to be about your money, your resources, your self-worth, really, on a deeper level. It's how you hold your own worth of who you are. So Saturn's been moving through there. You possibly have been learning a lot about that connection between your own self-worth and your finances, and what you do and how you manage your finances. So this would be a really good time to think about innovative uses of money and how that would impact your self-worth. Maybe you want to set an appointment with your financial advisor, or get a new one altogether, or invest in cryptocurrency. I don't know, whatever it may be. But there's something there that you've been working on that now allows you to really set a stamp on it.
Yeah. And the other piece that is totally related to exactly what you're saying is just simply thinking about a second house as being your resources, your personal resources. And when you have Aquarius in this era of your life, you have a great ability to kind of reinvent yourself, and also recognize that your resource is going to be a mental resource. Like, you have one hell of an imagination. And as you can recognize that and hold yourself, I don't know, I guess accountable for that, you're going to be capable of a lot. So I think I like that about Capricorn rising, having that Aquarius and inventiveness in that place.
Yeah, when you're, yeah, with Capricorn rising, there's such a seriousness about the presentation. And yet right there on the resource level, you've got that innovative spark. That's lovely. Okay, so next up we have those of you with Aquarius rising. This is very personal. This is happening in your first house, which is your personality. It's how people see you, how you show up individually. You know, the 10th house is your public face. This first house is your private face, the ones your friends meet. So over this past year plus, you've been really working on developing a clear understanding of how people perceive you, and yeah, developing that seriousness around your innovative kind of wild personality. So this allows you a moment with this new moon to plant a seed to increase that innovation of your presentation.
Yeah. And when you have Aquarius rising too, it's your ascendant, and that point in the ascendant refers to it certainly refers to your personalities of your as you're discussing, but it's also your life direction, and it sort of points you in this direction of having to really understand that Aquarius part of yourself and understand that what you're doing is there's a real brilliance to it. And I think about the mad scientist a lot with the Aquarius rising, like your hair sticking up kind of wild and having all these crazy ideas. And you also may recognize that you kind of project that image out. That's what people see. So it's interesting kind of wrestling, like what's the authentic part of that that's you. So there's a question around that. So yeah, some lessons around that with Saturn there.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So, okay, if you've got Pisces rising, this is falling in your 12th house. That's very different than having it fallen in your first. You know, the 12th house it's just such an interesting area of the chart. It's what's hidden from view rather than with the last one we talked about in the first house. That's how people see you. This is a very hidden place. It's your unconscious. This really, when I think of Saturn moving through the 12th house, I think of it as a time when we really have the ability to dig deep into our unconscious patterns and learn so much about ourselves from that deep inner level. And so with the new moon happening there, this is a time to really think about how you can approach and deepen your pathway into that understanding.
Yeah, that's great, Laurie. Yeah. I know the 12th house is always, there's so much to do with, it's just interesting. It's a tough house in a way to explain. And I know we kind of mentioned that a lot. And this is kind of where you wrestle with solitude, where you just have to kind of deal with what, you recognize that suffering is tied in with isolation, and people feeling alone. But what's interesting here is when you have Pisces rising, you really have this clear view with the Aquarius in the 12th house of other people's suffering. I mean, you just can see right into it. So it's something about that is just sort of recognizing that, and then letting that play into the fact that you are a Pisces rising and you are here to offer compassion and forgiveness and sort of a softness to others. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I think we went through all 12 of the rising signs with a bunch of computer problems. I hope the little glitches in this video aren't too distracting. I'll do my best to piece them together. But thank you, Jennie, for being tolerant during this. I personally will be very happy when both Venus and Mercury are moving direct, and maybe by then I'll have a new computer.
No, I appreciate you doing the behind the scenes. I know you're gonna have to go and cobble together a couple things, and I really appreciate that. So thank you, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you, and thanks everybody, and ta-ta.
Bye.